It's 3:17 a.m. You're lying in bed, thinking. The kind of deep, intense thinking that only happens when the world is quiet. And in that quiet, you feel a moment of absolute clarity, a conviction about an idea that feels more true and more urgent than it did 12 hours ago. But what if I told you that this feeling of clarity is a trap? We assume that our intelligence protects us from deception. But during these quiet nighttime hours, your brain is actually making you more vulnerable. The cruel irony is that your intelligence isn't your defense. It's the weapon your mind uses to build more sophisticated, more convincing lies that you tell yourself. Tonight, we explore a disturbing truth. Your intelligence can be your greatest vulnerability. We will examine how the smartest people can believe impossible things, and why your most profound late-night thoughts might actually be your most dangerous ones. But first, we need to understand exactly how intelligence becomes a trap, because this paradox is at the heart of everything we're going to explore. In 1999, psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger published research that would fundamentally change how we think about competence and confidence. But their findings revealed something far more disturbing than the famous Dunning-Kruger effect that most people know about. They discovered that intelligence doesn't just fail to protect us from false beliefs. It actually makes us more sophisticated in defending them. Here's the cruel irony. The smarter you are, the better your brain becomes at generating convincing reasons for beliefs you want to hold, regardless of whether those beliefs are actually true. Think about this for a moment. Your intelligence, the cognitive ability you probably consider your greatest asset, functions like a high-powered lawyer hired by your emotions. When you encounter information that challenges something you believe, your brain doesn't objectively evaluate the evidence. Instead, it immediately begins building a case for why you can dismiss that information and keep believing what you already believe. And the more intelligent you are, the more sophisticated that case becomes. This is why highly educated people can believe things that seem obviously false to others. It's not that they're stupid or gullible. It's that they're smart enough to create elaborate intellectual frameworks that make their beliefs seem rational, even when those beliefs are completely disconnected from reality. Let me give you an example that might feel uncomfortably familiar. You're scrolling through your phone late at night, and you encounter information that contradicts something you believe to be true. Maybe it's about politics, health, science, or just some opinion you've held for years. For most people, there's a moment of cognitive discomfort, a brief pause where the brain recognizes the conflict between what you believed and what you're now seeing. But here's where your intelligence kicks in, not as a tool for truth-seeking, but as a defense mechanism. Within seconds, your brain starts generating reasons why this new information might be wrong, incomplete, or irrelevant. You might think about the source and question their credibility. You might recall other information that supports your original belief. You might even start researching to find evidence that contradicts what you just encountered. This all feels like critical thinking. It feels like you're being rational, careful, intellectually responsible. But what's actually happening is something psychologists call motivated reasoning. Your brain has already decided what conclusion it wants to reach, and it's using your intelligence to build a path to that predetermined destination. The research on this is disturbing. Studies show that when people are given information that challenges their beliefs, those with higher cognitive ability are actually better at finding flaws in the challenging information. Even when that information is completely accurate, they're not better at finding truth. They're better at avoiding it when it's inconvenient. This gets even worse when we consider something called identity protective cognition. This is the process where your brain protects beliefs that are tied to your sense of self. If you've built part of your identity around being the kind of person who believes certain things, then changing those beliefs feels like psychological death. Your brain treats challenges to identity-linked beliefs the same way it treats physical threats. The fight or flight response kicks in, stress hormones flood your system, and your capacity for objective analysis essentially shuts down. All that's left is your intelligence working overtime to defend who you think you are. And here's what makes this particularly relevant to your late-night mental state. Stress and fatigue amplify all of these processes. When you're tired, when your psychological defenses are down, when you're in that vulnerable space between wakefulness and sleep, your brain becomes even more protective of beliefs that provide comfort and certainty. This is why content consumed between 11 p.m. and 4 a.m. often feels more profound, more true, more important than the same content consumed during daytime hours. Your critical thinking is diminished, but your emotional investment in information increases. You're more likely to accept ideas that confirm what you already believe, and more likely to reject ideas that challenge your existing worldview. But there's something even more unsettling about how this works, something that affects every single piece of information you process, especially during those quiet, vulnerable hours when you think you're just innocently scrolling, just casually learning, just harmlessly exploring ideas. The research I'm about to share will explain why this is happening to you right now. As you're watching this, as your brain is already starting to decide whether to accept or reject everything I'm telling you, based on how it fits with who you think you are and what you already believe about yourself. Because your brain isn't just filtering information randomly. After 10 p.m., your brain literally changes the way it processes information. And understanding this shift will explain why your nighttime thoughts feel so different from your daytime reasoning. Your brain operates on what scientists call a circadian rhythm, an internal clock that regulates not just when you feel sleepy, but how you think, how you process information, and most importantly, how skeptical or accepting you are of new ideas. During daylight hours, your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for critical thinking, logical analysis, and impulse control, is at its peak performance. But as evening approaches, something fascinating and disturbing begins to happen. Your prefrontal cortex starts to power down, like a computer going into sleep mode. Meanwhile, other parts of your brain, the parts responsible for emotion, pattern recognition, and social bonding, become more active and influential in your decision-making process. This isn't a design flaw. This is evolutionary programming. For most of human history, nighttime was when our ancestors gathered around fires, shared stories, bonded with their tribe, and made sense of the world through narrative rather than analysis. Your brain is literally wired to be more accepting of information that feels emotionally resonant and socially connected during these hours. But here's where this becomes dangerous in our modern world. The same neurological shift that once helped our ancestors bond over shared stories now makes you more vulnerable to accepting information that feels emotionally satisfying, regardless of whether it's actually true. Research by Dr. Mareike Wyeth and Rose Zaks found that people are significantly more likely to accept false information during their non-optimal hours. For most people, non-optimal hours are late at night. During these times, your brain's ability to detect inconsistencies, spot logical fallacies, and maintain skeptical distance from new information dramatically decreases. At the same time, your brain's reward system becomes more sensitive to information that confirms your existing beliefs or makes you feel special, enlightened, or ahead of the curve. This is why conspiracy theories, sensational health claims, and emotionally charged political content feel so much more compelling when you encounter them at 2 a.m. than they would at 2 p.m. Let me paint a picture that might feel uncomfortably familiar. It's late, you're tired, but your mind is still active. You're scrolling through content, and you encounter something that makes you think, finally, someone is talking about this. Or, I knew something felt off about that. Or, this explains so much. In that moment, your brain is flooded with dopamine, the same neurotransmitter associated with physical pleasure. You feel smart, informed, like you're seeing something that others might miss. This feeling is so powerful, so satisfying, that your brain wants to protect it. And the way it protects that feeling is by reducing your skepticism about the information that created it. This is why late-night content consumption can feel like a series of revelations, like pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. Your brain is literally drugging you with pleasure chemicals when you encounter information that fits your existing beliefs or makes you feel intellectually superior. But there's another factor that makes nighttime particularly dangerous for rational thinking: social isolation. During the day, you interact with people who might challenge your ideas, ask questions, or provide alternative perspectives. At night, you're alone with your thoughts, your phone, and algorithms that are specifically designed to feed you more of what you already engage with. This creates what psychologists call an echo chamber effect, but it's amplified by your brain's nighttime vulnerability. You're not just hearing ideas that confirm your beliefs. You're hearing them when your capacity to critically evaluate them is at its lowest point. The algorithms know this. Social media platforms have data showing that engagement rates are highest during late-night hours, not just because more people are online, but because people are more likely to interact with content emotionally rather than analytically during these hours. They know you're more likely to share, comment, and click when your critical thinking is impaired. This is particularly problematic for intelligent people because you're aware enough to know that you should be skeptical, but your nighttime brain state makes you feel like you're being appropriately cautious when you're actually being manipulated by sophisticated systems designed to exploit your psychological vulnerabilities. Here's the disturbing part most people never realize about their late-night minds: that feeling of clarity, that sense of finally understanding something important. That conviction that feels so real and so justified is actually your brain in its most suggestible state. You feel most certain when you should be most skeptical. And this leads us to something even more unsettling about how your mind protects itself from uncomfortable truths. Something that explains why even when you know about these vulnerabilities, even when you understand how your brain tricks you, you still find yourself falling into the same patterns night after night. Because your beliefs aren't really about truth at all. They're about feeling safe in an uncertain world, and your brain will sacrifice accuracy for comfort every single time. This is perhaps the most uncomfortable realization about human psychology. We don't actually want truth as much as we think we do. What we want is certainty, predictability, and the feeling that we understand what's happening around us. Truth is only valuable when it serves these deeper psychological needs. Think about the beliefs you hold most strongly. Not just intellectual positions, but the deep convictions that feel absolutely certain to you. Now ask yourself an honest question. When did you last actively seek out information that could prove these beliefs wrong? When did you last genuinely consider that you might be completely mistaken about something important? If you're like most people, the answer is probably never. And there's a reason for this that goes far deeper than simple stubbornness or intellectual laziness. Your brain treats your belief system like a psychological shelter. Just as your body needs physical shelter to survive, your mind needs conceptual shelter to function. Your beliefs provide structure, meaning, and predictability in a world that is fundamentally chaotic and uncertain. Challenging these beliefs feels like tearing down the walls of your mental home. This is why people can maintain obviously false beliefs, even when confronted with overwhelming evidence. It's not that they can't see the evidence. It's that accepting the evidence would require them to live in psychological uncertainty, and uncertainty feels like a threat to survival. Let me give you an example that might hit close to home. You probably have strong opinions about politics, health, relationships, or career choices. These opinions feel rational to you. You've thought about them. You have reasons for holding them. You can defend them in conversation. But here's what's really happening. Your brain has selected these beliefs not because they're true, but because they make you feel secure, competent, and aligned with people you want to be associated with. The evidence for this is everywhere once you start looking. People tend to adopt the beliefs of their social groups, regardless of the actual evidence supporting those beliefs. They tend to maintain beliefs that make them feel smart, moral, or special. They tend to reject information that would require them to admit mistakes, change their lifestyle, or distance themselves from their community. This process is so automatic, so deeply embedded in how your brain works, that it happens below the level of conscious awareness. You genuinely believe you're being rational when you're actually being protective. And this protective mechanism becomes supercharged during late-night hours when you're tired, emotionally vulnerable, and separated from the social anchors that might challenge your thinking during the day. Think about the content that draws you in during those late-night scrolling sessions. Is it content that challenges your worldview, that makes you question your assumptions, that presents uncomfortable possibilities you hadn't considered? Or is it content that confirms what you already believe, that makes you feel vindicated, that provides explanations for things that were bothering you? For most people, it's the latter. We're drawn to information that makes us feel like we already knew something, like we were right all along, like the world makes sense in the way we thought it did. This feels like learning, but it's actually a form of psychological comfort seeking. Your brain is constantly scanning for information that threatens your conceptual shelter. And when it finds such information, it doesn't respond with curiosity. It responds with defense mechanisms designed to preserve your sense of security and certainty. One of the most sophisticated of these defense mechanisms is something psychologists call cognitive immunization. When you encounter information that challenges an important belief, your brain doesn't just reject the information. It generates counter-arguments, finds alternative explanations, and builds intellectual defenses that make you more resistant to similar challenges in the future. This is why arguing with people about their deeply held beliefs is usually counterproductive. Each challenge actually strengthens their commitment to those beliefs by forcing their brain to develop better defenses. But there's something even more unsettling about how this emotional protection works, something that affects every piece of information you encounter, especially when you're in that vulnerable late-night state where your psychological defenses are simultaneously weakened and desperately needed. The most disturbing aspect of this comfort-seeking behavior is that it's often disguised as truth-seeking. You genuinely feel like you're being curious, open-minded, and intellectually honest when you research topics that interest you. But what's actually happening is that your brain is selectively directing your attention toward information that will reinforce your existing comfort zone while avoiding information that would threaten it. This selective attention is so subtle that you don't notice it happening. You're not consciously deciding to ignore challenging information. Your brain is simply making that information less visible, less interesting, less compelling than information that confirms what you already believe. During late-night hours, when your critical thinking is impaired, but your emotional investment in feeling secure is heightened, this process becomes even more pronounced. You're not just seeking information that's comfortable. You're seeking information that feels urgent, important, like something you need to know right now. This urgency is artificial. It's your brain's way of making comfort-seeking feel like an intellectual emergency. The information doesn't become more true or more important after 11 p.m., but it feels more true and more important because your psychological need for certainty increases as your capacity for dealing with ambiguity decreases. This explains why late-night content consumption often leads to strong convictions about topics you'd barely considered during daylight hours. Your brain isn't becoming more insightful at night. It's becoming more desperate for psychological security, and that desperation feels like enlightenment. The next revelation about how you consume information might make you uncomfortable, because it reveals how your brain has been editing reality without your permission, creating a customized version of the world that feels true but isn't necessarily accurate. And this editing process is far more sophisticated than you realize. Your brain is constantly filtering, organizing, and presenting information to you in ways that support what you already believe. And this filtering system becomes your invisible editor of reality. Right now, as you're processing the information in this video, your brain is making thousands of micro decisions about what to pay attention to, what to remember, what to question, and what to accept. These decisions feel conscious and rational, but they're actually being made by unconscious systems designed to protect your existing worldview. This is what psychologists call confirmation bias, but that term doesn't capture how sophisticated and pervasive this process really is. You're not just seeking information that confirms your beliefs. Your brain is actively reconstructing reality to make your beliefs seem more reasonable and well-supported than they actually are. Let me walk you through how this works with an example that will probably feel familiar. You encounter a piece of information that supports something you already believe. Maybe it's a study that confirms a health practice you follow, or data that supports a political position you hold, or an expert opinion that validates a choice you've made. When this happens, your brain immediately classifies this information as credible, important, and worth remembering. You might share it with friends, bookmark it for later, or file it away as evidence for future discussions. The source seems reliable, the methodology seems sound, and the conclusions seem obvious and well-reasoned. But now imagine you encounter information that challenges that same belief. A study with opposite findings, data that contradicts your position, or an expert opinion that suggests you might be wrong. What happens in your brain is completely different, even though the information might be objectively more reliable than what you accepted before. Instead of treating this challenging information with the same openness, your brain immediately becomes suspicious. You start looking for flaws in the methodology, questioning the credibility of the source, wondering about potential bias or hidden agendas. You might research the funding behind the study, look for conflicting studies, or find experts who disagree with these conclusions. This feels like being appropriately skeptical, like doing your intellectual due diligence. But what's actually happening is that you're applying completely different standards of evidence, depending on whether information supports or challenges your existing beliefs. Information that confirms what you believe gets processed quickly and accepted readily. Information that challenges what you believe gets subjected to intense scrutiny and often rejected for reasons you wouldn't apply to confirming information. This double standard is so automatic that you don't realize you're doing it. You genuinely believe you're being equally critical of all information. But research shows that people can spend 10 times longer evaluating evidence that challenges their beliefs compared to evidence that supports them. The most disturbing part of this process is that it works perfectly. By the time your brain is finished filtering and processing information, you're left with a coherent, reasonable-seeming worldview where most of the evidence supports what you believe and conflicting evidence has been discredited or dismissed. This filtered reality feels completely natural and objective to you. You're not aware that your brain has been editing out information, downplaying contradictory evidence, and amplifying supporting data. The world just seems to work in ways that confirm your existing understanding. And this process becomes dramatically more biased during late-night hours, when your capacity for genuine skepticism is reduced, but your emotional investment in maintaining comfortable beliefs is increased. Think about the last time you spent an hour or more researching something online late at night. Maybe you started with a question or a topic that interested you. By the end of that session, you probably felt like you'd learned something important, like pieces of a puzzle had clicked into place, like you understood something better than before. But if you're honest about that experience, you probably didn't encounter much information that fundamentally challenged your existing views on the topic. You probably didn't seriously consider explanations that would require you to change your mind about something important. Most of the information you found probably felt like it confirmed things you already suspected or believed. This isn't because the internet only contains information that supports your views. It's because your brain especially in its nighttime vulnerable state, is incredibly sophisticated at finding and focusing on information that feels psychologically safe while avoiding information that feels threatening. The algorithms that control what you see online have learned to exploit this bias. They know that you're more likely to engage with content that confirms your existing beliefs, so they feed you more of that content. But you experience this as the internet being a rich source of information that happens to align with your intelligent, well-reasoned worldview. What I discovered about late-night internet habits will genuinely disturb you, because it reveals how this evidence filtering process gets weaponized by systems specifically designed to capture and hold your attention by feeding your brain exactly the kind of biased information it craves. The platforms know something about your nighttime vulnerability that you don't. Between 11 p.m. and 4 a.m., you're most vulnerable to digital manipulation, and the algorithms have been specifically designed to exploit the psychological weaknesses that emerge during these hours. Social media platforms collect detailed data about when you're most likely to engage with different types of content. They know that during late-night hours, you're more likely to click on sensational headlines, more likely to share content without fact-checking, more likely to engage emotionally with posts, and most importantly, more likely to spend extended periods consuming content that confirms your existing beliefs. This isn't accidental. These platforms employ teams of neuroscientists, behavioral psychologists, and data scientists whose job is to understand and exploit the predictable patterns of human psychology. They know that your nighttime brain is fundamentally different from your daytime brain, and they've built systems specifically designed to take advantage of that difference. Here's how it works. During your normal waking hours, you encounter a mix of perspectives, opinions, and information sources. You interact with people who might disagree with you. You consume media from various outlets. You're exposed to information that challenges as well as confirms your worldview. This natural diversity acts as a kind of intellectual immune system, preventing any single perspective from completely dominating your thinking. But late at night, when you're alone with your device, this natural diversity disappears. You're no longer getting input from the complex mix of sources you encounter during the day. Instead, you're getting input from algorithms that have been trained to give you exactly what you're most likely to engage with based on your previous behavior. And what you're most likely to engage with late at night is content that makes you feel smart, validated, and emotionally satisfied. Content that challenges your worldview feels uncomfortable when you're tired and psychologically vulnerable. Content that confirms your worldview feels rewarding and intellectually stimulating. So the algorithms learn to feed you a steady stream of information that feels profound and important, but is actually just a sophisticated form of psychological comfort food. You experience this as having access to incredible insights and information that other people might not know about. But what's actually happening is that you're being fed a customized reality designed to keep you engaged and emotionally invested. This creates what researchers call algorithmic amplification of confirmation bias. Your natural tendency to prefer confirming information gets amplified by systems that are specifically designed to give you more of what you already believe. But there's an even more disturbing aspect to this process. Late-night social media consumption doesn't just expose you to biased information. It creates the illusion of social proof for that information. When you see posts, comments, and discussions that align with your beliefs, especially during those vulnerable late-night hours, your brain interprets this as evidence that lots of other people share your views. This feels like social validation, like you're part of a community of informed, thoughtful people who understand something important. But what you're actually seeing is the result of algorithmic filtering that creates echo chambers so sophisticated they're invisible to the people inside them. The platform isn't showing you a representative sample of what people think. It's showing you content from the small subset of users whose engagement patterns are similar to yours. This means that during your late-night scrolling sessions, you're not just consuming biased information. You're consuming biased information that comes with artificial social proof. You're not just seeing content that confirms your beliefs. You're seeing content that makes it look like everyone agrees with those beliefs. This false social consensus is particularly powerful during late-night hours because social connection is one of the fundamental human needs that your brain is trying to satisfy when you're alone and psychologically vulnerable. Seeing content that aligns with your views, accompanied by likes, comments, and shares from people who seem to think like you do, provides a sense of social belonging that feels deeply satisfying. But this social belonging is artificially constructed. The community you feel connected to during your late-night online sessions isn't a real community of people who've independently arrived at similar conclusions. It's an algorithmic simulation of community designed to keep you engaged with the platform. The platforms know that social proof is one of the most powerful psychological drivers of belief formation. They know that people are more likely to accept information that seems to be accepted by others. And they've built systems that create artificial social proof for whatever beliefs will keep you most engaged with their content. This is where it gets psychologically dangerous for intelligent people, because you're aware enough to know that you should be skeptical of information you find online. But the sophisticated nature of these manipulation systems makes them nearly impossible to detect when you're in a vulnerable psychological state. And once you've invested in believing something, your brain activates an even more powerful defense mechanism. Admitting you're wrong doesn't just hurt your ego, it threatens your entire sense of self. And your brain treats this threat as seriously as it would treat physical danger. Think about a belief you've held for a long time. Something you've defended in conversations, something you've used to make important decisions, something that other people know you believe. Now imagine discovering that this belief is completely false. Not just slightly inaccurate, but fundamentally, embarrassingly wrong. The discomfort you feel just imagining this scenario isn't intellectual embarrassment. It's your brain's alarm system activating, warning you that your psychological identity is under threat. This is because beliefs aren't just abstract intellectual positions. They become part of who you are. Once you've invested time, energy, and social capital in a belief, changing your mind about that belief feels like losing a piece of yourself. Psychologists call this the sunk cost fallacy, but when it comes to beliefs, it's more than a logical error. It's a fundamental feature of how human identity works. The more you've invested in being right about something, the more psychological cost there is to admitting you are wrong. This investment happens gradually, often without you noticing. You encounter information that supports a particular view. You share that information with friends. You make decisions based on that view. You get into discussions where you defend that position. Each of these actions increases your psychological investment in being right. But here's what makes this particularly dangerous during late-night hours. When you're tired and emotionally vulnerable, your brain becomes much more willing to make large psychological investments in new beliefs, especially if those beliefs make you feel intelligent, informed, or special. That compelling video you watched at 2 a.m., the one that explained everything, that connected all the dots, that made you feel like you finally understood something important. It didn't just give you information. It gave you a new piece of identity. You became the kind of person who knows about this topic, who understands this perspective, who sees through the conventional wisdom that most people accept. And once you've made that identity investment, your brain will defend it the same way it defends your physical safety. This defense mechanism is so powerful that it can override even your strongest intellectual commitments. People who pride themselves on being rational, evidence-based thinkers can maintain obviously false beliefs for years, even decades, because abandoning those beliefs would require them to admit that they've been wrong about something important to their identity. The most disturbing aspect of this process is that the defense mechanisms become more sophisticated over time. Each challenge to your belief system forces your brain to develop better arguments, find more supporting evidence, and build more elaborate intellectual frameworks to protect what you believe. This is why intelligent people can believe impossible things. It's not that they start out believing something obviously false. They start out believing something that seems reasonable. Then their brain gradually builds an increasingly complex structure of supporting beliefs, confirming evidence, and defensive arguments around that original belief. By the time the belief system is fully developed, it's virtually impregnable. Any challenge can be deflected with sophisticated reasoning, alternative interpretations, or questions about the challenger's motives or credibility. The belief system becomes self-reinforcing and self-protecting. And this process is accelerated during nighttime hours, when your critical thinking is impaired, but your emotional investment in maintaining psychological security is heightened. Late-night content consumption often leads to rapid, intense belief formation, followed by equally rapid development of defensive structures around those beliefs. Think about how this might have played out in your own life. Maybe you encountered a compelling explanation for something during a late-night online session. The explanation felt profound, important, like a piece of a puzzle clicking into place. You might have shared it with someone, or at least filed it away as something you now understood. But then, later, maybe during daylight hours when your critical thinking was sharper, you encountered information that challenged that late-night revelation. Instead of reconsidering your new belief, what did your brain do? Did it objectively evaluate the challenging information? Or did it immediately start looking for ways to dismiss, discredit, or explain away the challenge? For most people, it's the latter. Once you've made a psychological investment in a belief, especially a belief that makes you feel intelligent or informed, your brain will work overtime to protect that investment. This is where it gets psychologically dangerous for intelligent people. Because the smarter you are, the better your brain becomes at generating sophisticated defenses for beliefs you want to protect. Your intelligence becomes a weapon that your emotions use against your own capacity for objective thinking. The mechanism behind this identity protection is more personal than you think, because it's not really about the beliefs themselves. It's about something much deeper and more fundamental to how you see yourself and how you navigate the world. The more you've invested in being right about something, the more psychological cost there is to admitting you are wrong. This investment happens gradually, often without you noticing. You encounter information that supports a particular view. You share that information with friends. You make decisions based on that view. You get into discussions where you defend that position. Each of these actions increases your psychological investment in being right. But here's what makes this particularly dangerous during late-night hours. When you're tired and emotionally vulnerable, your brain becomes much more willing to make large psychological investments in new beliefs, especially if those beliefs make you feel intelligent, informed, or special. That compelling video you watched at 2 a.m., the one that explained everything, that connected all the dots, that made you feel like you finally understood something important. It didn't just give you information. It gave you a new piece of identity. You became the kind of person who knows about this topic, who understands this perspective, who sees through the conventional wisdom that most people accept. And once you've made that identity investment, your brain will defend it the same way it defends your physical safety. This defense mechanism is so powerful that it can override even your strongest intellectual commitments. People who pride themselves on being rational, evidence-based thinkers can maintain obviously false beliefs for years, even decades, because abandoning those beliefs would require them to admit that they've been wrong about something important to their identity. But what we've explored tonight is just the surface of how your mind imprisons itself. The psychological investment we've been discussing, this desperate need to be right, this chemical addiction to confirmation, it all serves a deeper, more fundamental purpose that most people never recognize. Your beliefs don't just protect your ego. They don't just make you feel smart or informed or special. They become part of who you are at the most basic level. And when that happens, when your ideas become fused with your identity, questioning them stops feeling like intellectual exploration and starts feeling like psychological death. The mechanisms that create this fusion between belief and identity are more sophisticated and more disturbing than anything we've discussed so far. They operate below the level of conscious awareness, turning your intelligence into a weapon that your emotions use against your own capacity for growth and understanding. In our next exploration, we'll venture into the deepest level of the intelligence trap, where your beliefs don't just feel true, they feel like you. Where changing your mind doesn't just mean admitting you were wrong. It means confronting the terrifying possibility that you might not be who you think you are. We'll examine how your brain creates an invisible prison of identity, how it uses your intelligence to build walls you can't even see, and most importantly, how understanding these mechanisms can finally set you free from the psychological patterns that have been limiting your thinking for years. The journey we're about to take will challenge everything you believe about belief itself. And it begins with recognizing that the person you think you are might be the very thing standing between you and the truth you're seeking. Until then, notice how your mind responds to what we've discussed. Notice if you find yourself defending ideas more vigorously or seeking out information that confirms what you've always believed. Notice if the quiet hours feel different now that you understand how vulnerable they make you. Because awareness is the first step toward freedom. And freedom from the intelligence trap is the beginning of true wisdom.